What's up, everybody? How's it going? I just realized I need to get some music or something like for this intro period, make it more exciting. Anybody rock into some Christmas music or something that you want to unmute and share with the rest of us for a couple minutes while real estate agents enter on their own time? Oliver, I bet you're rocking some music.
In my head, yes. I actually woke up this morning with I put it in my wife's ear. I was like, it's Christmas. And she was like, she slapped me. She's like, shut up.
She didn't really slap you, did she?
No, just a good shrug.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't see her slapping you ever.
Yeah.
Cody, what's up, my friend? It's been a minute.
It has, brother. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for turning your video on.
Well, I got a nice little KW branded sign down at our urban living office, so I figured why not? You know, and I got a fresh cut today, so got to show that off too.
I know. Maybe I need to take a picture of that and use it for my background. That looks good. Not that I would expect anything less from you guys down there.
Yeah, it does look good. Thanks to Brian and all of his marketing efforts. He's got us looking very festive. We've actually got a bunch of Christmas stuff around here. So I don't have a tree up this year, but you know, that's why I come in the office and get my fix here.
There you go. There you go. Cool. Well, I'm going to wait one more minute here and then I'm just going to get rolling because I don't know. I know these are usually either really busy or really slow this time of year. So we may not have a very heavy crowd. But I've got good info, actually. There's some good stuff here. Some big news coming up this week. So we'll have some good info here for those of you that are still working and still want to give good stuff to your clients. So
yeah, I feel like this is like the last week. Well, this week going into like early next week before people just fully check out. Yeah, I feel like I still got to get some shopping done, and I imagine Easton's probably going to be packed even Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So
I'm sure. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to get rolling here. As always, I would love it if anybody on the call wants to jump in, ask questions, point out any personal experiences that you guys might be having, because I think depending also who's on here in terms of whether everybody's in Central Ohio versus other parts of the country, I think as we get into the data, you'll see there are definitely some differences. So feel free to jump in or put in the chat, although it's hard for me to keep track of everything. So if I don't answer a question, anybody feel free to tell me there's something in the chat. So I'm going to get rolling here, share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah, cool. All right. So there we go. All right. So basically what we've got going on today is we're going to go over our inventory and selling trends, which we usually do, jump into interest rates, which is probably the biggest topic of the year, but definitely over the next couple of years or a couple of days, I think is going to be a huge topic, and that ties into inflation. So if I, for some reason, forget to let you guys know to reach out to all of your buyers that haven't locked interest rates yet, or if you need something to get them off the fence, remind me if I forget, but I should go over that. And then per my usual cadence, becoming the local economist of choice, I just have a few kind of tips and ways that I feel like you can give some extra nuggets to your clients in terms of a value proposition. And then it didn't make it here to the topic, but I do also have kind of my opinion of the market, which I usually end up sharing anyways, but I created a slide for it this week. So we'll jump right in. Active listings. So we definitely have seen a leveling out of the increase that we've been seeing throughout the year. But as you can see again, and keeping in mind, these are the national trends, But as you can see, typically starting kind of June or July timeframe, definitely once we get into September and October, we start to see the number of active listings decline. And you can see this year, we've just kind of seen it flatten. If we don't see it decline at all in December, I think that'll be a huge indicator of the fact that our market definitely is trending in the wrong direction. I think we all feel like that, and the data certainly suggests that. But if we continue to see inventory increase despite seasonality, it's definitely going to be something we need to continue to keep our eye on. Obviously, compared to last year, as we've talked about, we're up almost 50% nationally. We're also here in Central Ohio up a similar amount. And so definitely a significant difference between last year and this year in terms of the percentage increase. But I always like to kind of point out the fact that even when you look at, and actually let me get my little laser pointer out here. Even if you look at like this year, you can see that last year, which is this green line, was significantly below where we were from 2017 to 19. And I think historical perspective is important. And as we roll into some of these other numbers, you're going to see how that plays out. So pending sales are definitely something that, if you're a real estate agent, which I believe almost everybody on this call is something that is important to you, since a drop in pending sales means a drop in collective commission dollars. Hopefully you guys are all taking your unfair share of the ones that are closing. But at the end of the day, a drop in pending sales is typically going to mean that you need to be watching your expenses and making sure you're prepared for potentially a downturn in terms of income in the following years, unless you're willing to do the work to keep it at least level. So you can see year over year, pending sales are down about 35%. And we've just kind of hit that major milestone that pending sales are now lower than 2019 levels, which is significant because it takes us into more of a traditional space. But I think the more significant is like what we talked about with the active listings, and that is that we started the year off kind of in the opposite space of being, one of the best years ever. And so the rate of decline is definitely the most concerning part of this.
Hey, Troy, this is Francis. Quick question for you. Is all this data national?
This is all national, and we'll jump into local here in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Because I think that's because I think our market, and I might be wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm hoping our market's faring a little better. But
to be honest with you, on a percentage basis, the spoiler alert is it's not that much better. But what we have to keep in mind from a percentage basis is, like, when we talk about inventory, the percentage basis of a 50% increase in inventory, because inventory was so low, we're actually still have only increased by 1,000 homes or 1,200 homes. And to put it into perspective, we have 35 to 40,000 that sell every year. So even though on a percentage basis we've increased substantially, in terms of an impact in like the months of inventory for sale and things like that, we're still strongly in the seller's market, both nationally and locally. Now, that being said, Francis, if we compare ourselves to Phoenix, Arizona, or Austin, Texas, like in terms of local market to local market, that's why we're pretty close to the average. But they are like up, their inventory levels are up substantially, their days on market are up substantially. So they're definitely in a much worse position year over year than we are. But yeah, I would say we're not far off of the average. I think though too, where we go in the future, our position is much better. And that's kind of my last slide, so I won't give it all away now. the biggest reason why we've been able to maintain what feels like, for those of us that are still selling houses, a relatively similar market is this slide. So even though the number of new listing, or even though the number of active properties is up 46%, the number of new listings is actually down by 17. So if you think about it, if we were still putting the same number of new listings on the market, we would actually be like almost at 70% higher than we were last year. But since new listings have dropped by 17%, which is much less locally, we're closer to 25% lower. That's offsetting the impact of the higher of the lower sales, basically. So, but the more inventory on the market, the less buyers in the market is certainly evident with the increased days on market. And we're actually worse off in terms of our increase in days on market than the national average. We've bumped up actually 6 full days just in the last 60 days in terms of average here in Central Ohio, which again, we'll get to in a second. We've seen median list price still year over year up 11% nationally, but we're down about 8% nationally from the peak, which happened this year in June. Now, to put that into perspective, in a normal year, we actually see a 2% decline in average or in median list price from the peak summer down to around the November, December, January timeframe. So most agents and certainly most consumers don't realize that you can see with the median that in an average year, we actually do drop throughout the year. So we hit a peak and then we drop until about January, February, and then we go up. Obviously, the goal is for our peak year to year to be higher than last year. But we actually, it's very normal that we see, and you can see that in years past, it's very normal. The difference this year is obviously because the prices have been so much higher, that decline, and the decline's been greater, but the decline has definitely been larger this year than in years past. But the first half of the year, we saw a much larger increase. So it's offset in some ways. I've liked this. Realtor.com kind of started doing this a couple months ago, but comparing the different regions of the US. And Francis, to your point, the Midwest is actually in the best shape of anybody in the country, which that's not very often the case. But it traditionally, especially the coast, the West Coast and the East Coast, do tend to be more volatile markets. So they tend to see higher highs and lower lows. So from that perspective, it's not. But in terms of real estate, it's rare, I feel like, that we're in the best position of anybody. But you can see from a regional perspective, the Midwest is only up about 2 days on market year over year. Median list price is up the most year over year on average. And then also the price per square foot is up the most year over year. So the Northeast has had a really bizarre market, in my opinion. It's like, yeah, it's really weird because their sales are down a ton, their days on market are up, but they actually aren't in as bad a shape as it feels. And largely probably because of the lower new listings. The West has definitely been hit the hardest nationally. So if you know anybody that lives like in Arizona or those Western states that historically were very sparsely populated, like Montana, Wyoming, those places blew up during COVID. They've seen a really significant decline this year and probably definitely led the pack in terms of price declines as well. Price declines definitely, we're at now the highest percentage of the market that's had a price reduction of any of the last 6 years. So 19.6% of properties that have gone on the market have had a price reduction, up almost 10% compared to last year. Now we did finally see a decline in this, which we had, I mean, if you look at that trend line, that's pretty steep between April and June. Again, this has been a larger issue, in my opinion, in other markets, even though we have still seen it here in Central Ohio, but just not to the same degree. Those prices in other markets were increasing at such a speed that when people were listing, they were just way, way too high. And we've seen that in our market as well. But I think for the most part in our market, if you price it appropriately, it typically is selling pretty quickly. So here are local market stats. Again, this is keeping in mind too, all of Central Ohio, which Francis, to your point earlier, even when you dive in deeper into specific areas within Central Ohio, you're going to see different, different markets for sure. But the number of properties for sale November to November is up 42.3%. But again, new listings are down 25% locally compared to November of last year. So that's almost completely offsetting the drop in sales, which is why for most of us, it still feels like a pretty strong market, because there really hasn't been a huge increase in the amount of available properties. Even though this 42% number seems really large, like I said, it's less than 1,000 properties across the entire market, which statistically is pretty insignificant. Let's see. And then pendings are down 21.1% compared to the same time last year, which again is significant because that foreshadows the solds for next month and the month after to continue to be down probably in that 20 to 25% range. I think, to be honest with you, I think the pendings lagged a little bit behind for the beginning part of like once summer came, partly because new builds were taking so long to complete. We were having a lot of new builds sitting in the pending. And I think that whole backlog of in contract new builds is starting to clean out. Properties are starting to close in a more normal time frame. And so I think we're going to continue to see the pendings more closely shadow like what we see the next month or two with regards to the sold properties. And then this is another thing though, to kind of fly in the face of my whole tone for the beginning of this, is this. And this is something that I personally have felt, and I would love if you want to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. But the last 2 weeks have been some of the strongest 2 weeks in terms of buying decisions that I've been seeing made by a lot of people that were sitting on the fence compared to probably the last 2 or 3 months. And again, maybe this is just my world, but I think this stat says it's not just my world. And the reason is the pendings. So the first 11 days of December, we saw 3%, 2.5% more properties go into contract than the first 11 days in November, which is really significant because typically the amount of properties going into contract after Thanksgiving declines substantially. So the fact that the beginning of November was slower than the beginning of December, I think is pretty significant. And for me, it happened right after the rate drop that happened about a week and a half ago. And now you've got 30-year rates closer to 6%. And I think it's crazy because at the beginning of the year to think that anybody would be excited about 6% interest rates. But I think 7% felt really, really, I mean, that's something that I've been in real estate for almost 20 years and I'd never seen 7% rates. I think 6%, not that any of us love it or are super used to it, but it was something that was around in that 2004, 5, 6, 7 range, and something that's maybe a little bit more palatable historically. We see average days on market, like I mentioned earlier, we've gone from a low in July of 12 days all the way up to the average for sold properties in November was 23 days on market. So definitely a significant increase. And then the other thing that's back again and I will point out, this is original list price. So some properties, you know, were priced too high originally, it had to come down sales price, but the average sold price to original list price is back down to 97%. So again, how would I use this number? Francis, if all of your listings have been selling at 100% of list price or 99.7, this should be in your listing presentation, that over the last 3 months in Central Ohio, you know, the original list price to sales price is 97% and mine is 99.5 or 100 or whatever it is. It's just an easy way to differentiate yourself to make sure you're not losing listing opportunities. Months of supply kind of mirrors that as well. At one point in May, actually, we were as low as a half a month, or 2 weeks worth of inventory. Right now we're up at 1.4, so almost a full month larger. But again, historical perspective, the NAR says that the balanced market is 4 to 6 months worth of inventory. So we're still strongly in a seller's market. And again, I think, you know, not every market and every price point is this way, but certainly a well-priced home in the 300 to 500 range in a suburban school district in Columbus is typically still selling within the first week, if it's well priced. And many of them are still getting multiple offers, maybe not 12, but 2 or 3. And so I still think that we're, you know, overall in a pretty good market. If you teleported yourself back to 2017 and told somebody that they could sell their house in 1 weekend for almost list price, they would be extremely happy with you. So I think, again, perspective is important. Average sales price, it is down. Interestingly enough, the active list price is up compared to October, or was up in November compared to October, but the average sold price was down 3%. We're still up about 7.7% on average sold price November to November. So again, still a really healthy appreciation level for Central Ohio. I mean, historically, you know, we were pretty happy with 3 or 4% historically. So I know last year having 13 to 18% was nice, but I still think, you know, I always look at things this way. We figure it's usually between 7 and 8% to sell a home. If you can buy a home this year and in 1 year break even, if you have to sell with closing costs and everything else, you're still sitting in a pretty good market. Because again, historically, that's 2 to 3 years in Central Ohio. So still, I think a pretty good year. Obviously, we saw the majority of that appreciation happening at the beginning of the year, but still looking pretty good on trends. Like we mentioned earlier, interest rates, in my opinion, they are the news. My strong opinion, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes, is definitely that the market is going to go the way of interest rates, meaning if we see rates come back down here over the next couple months, I think this is going to be a 3 or 4 month blip in a radar of a really strong market. And if we see rates continue to hover between 6 and 7%, I think it's still going to put a lid on things for a while. But you can see here over the last month and a half, we've seen rates come off of their high. We were pretty steady there for about a month in that 7%, maybe a little bit more than 7% range. And now we're closer to that 6% here locally. I had a VA buyer over the weekend with 1/3 of a point could get their rate down to 5.75. So that's pretty good stuff compared to the way it's been. Again, just keeping in mind difference in payment, that's the biggest driver for people not listing their home, and then also buyers not making buying decisions. Inflation, really the reason for the rate conversation, the reason for the rate increases. And if we move, I'm going to jump over to this while we're talking about interest rates, but this is the cadence of the inflation numbers that came out last month. And then also Jerome Powell's conversation were around these two. And basically that's when we saw those huge drops within almost one day. Basically they happened and then they stayed relatively flat. And why is that important? Because tomorrow this report comes out, and then Wednesday this conversation happens again. So in the next 48 hours, basically we're going to see most likely a pretty good drop. I think if we meet or beat the inflation numbers, meaning inflation is weaker than expected or on par with what's expected, I think we probably see rates go down, because I think Powell is going to say that, you know, they're going to stay on the same track that they've been on, which is basically tempering down the rate increases into next year, and hopefully by the end of next year looking at lowering the Fed funds rate again. If you see inflation go above what we were expecting, then all bets are off and we could be talking about 7% by the end of the week again. So if you have any buyers who are floating because they're really big gamblers, my recommendation would be to lock in today. I'm not a mortgage loan officer, but those conversations should absolutely be happening today. Just because rolling the dice into tomorrow, you could see a pretty significant change going into tomorrow. Try to find a lender that does the float down, has the float down feature for the rate. So again, we've got the two different kinds of inflation. And I think, I mean, obviously you take into account gas prices, shipping costs, a lot of those things. I just saw something this morning that and diesel fuel had, the reserves had gotten like within less than 30 days. And so prices went up a ton. And apparently here within the last week, diesel fuel reserves have gotten back to where they like them. So I heard this guy from Gas Buddies, the CEO of Gas Buddies, said he expects unleaded to be below $3 a gallon on average by Christmas, and he expects diesel to drop up to $1 a gallon over the next couple weeks. So if those things continue to happen, obviously diesel fuel impacts basically everything we buy because it has to be moved with semis that use it. So not enough Tesla trucks out there yet, I don't think, to make an impact on that. All right, so in terms of being the local economist of choice, I think you just need to make sure that you understand how to use this data in conversations with your clients. So these next couple are definitely meant to do that. So I think with regards to, and I forgot to change the title of this, so sorry, but I think being able to interpret what the Fed's decision is over the next couple of days and inflation data are a couple opportunities to just explain to your clients in layman's terms what all this means to them. So I think there's some social media opportunities there. And then I talked about this last month, and I'll continue to talk about it, is the importance of understanding financing. I have a couple lenders that I trust quite a bit, and I had to be the one that brought up the interest rate buy down this weekend. How many points is it going to take to get me down to 5.75? And he's like, actually, I can get you down to 6 with 1/3 of a point. And then 20 minutes later, he's like, actually, I can get you down to 5.75 with 1/3 of a point. So I only say this to say that everybody's busy. And obviously we choose to work with lenders that do a great job for us and our clients, but everybody's a human. And going to bat for your clients and asking the lender a couple clarifying questions on, hey, what would a rate buy down look like? How many points would it take to get a much better rate? You know, it takes 2 seconds to type out an email, and it could save, I mean, in this case, it's probably going to save my client about $30 a month for, actually it's going to save him $60 a month for what ended up being $1,300 in seller concessions on a $400,000 property. So pretty significant savings, and, you know, hopefully makes us look better. Obviously, a lot of what's driving my opinions on the next page is just an overall lack of inventory. Specifically in Central Ohio, we're just extremely underbuilt. I talked about this last month, but currently the region has been building about $8,000 to $9,000 or 8,000 to 9,000 homes per year over the last decade. And according to BIA estimates, we need to be building between 14 and 19,000 to keep up with demand. That number is not going to change. And if anything, unfortunately, recession or slower economy is going to cause the builders to build even fewer homes. And Intel is still going to come here. And all of these employers that are coming here are still going to come here. Most likely Honda's still going to build their battery plant. And so I just really think that on the supply side of the equation, we're going to have a long-term issue, and apartments are only suitable for so many people. And we've got the millennial generation, which is the largest generation we've ever had in the US, that is at the age of home buying when people usually buy their first homes. And many of them still have not bought their first home, and they're getting married a little bit later in life. They're having kids a little bit later in life. And so their need and desire for the yard and all of that stuff is coming a little bit later. And so I think that we've got tons of pent up demand already. And if anything, this recession is only going to cause builders to pause, which is going to create an even larger issue 2, 3, 4 years from now, here locally and nationally, I think.
Hey, Troy,
right, so
have you heard any numbers on the battery plant? Kind of what's hiring wise, what they're like?
I don't have them handy off the top of my head though, but I'll get those, because I actually would like to have those more off the top of my head.
I think it's a couple thousand actually, is what, if I recall correctly.
I think so too. I mean, I know the overall investment between the battery plant and then upgrades to the Marysville plant are going to be about $4 billion, which makes it the second largest project ever in the state of Ohio, behind Intel. So it's very significant, but I want to say you're right, like somewhere in the 1,500 to 2,000 person range sounds right to me, but I'll double check that.
So that should be really good for, start to think of London, Grove City, that, that part of, since it's in Fayette County.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a mistake at all or a coincidence at all that they chose the complete opposite side of the city from the Intel plant to build it. I mean, obviously, I think you also have access to the Dayton and Cincinnati job market, but I think you're exactly right. I think that whole area over there, as Dayton continues to grow and Cincinnati grows north, and then along with the position of that battery plant, you're just going to start to see Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati, I think, just grow even more and more together from a regional perspective, just because there's going to be less and less distance between what people consider Central Ohio and Southwest Ohio. So yeah, I anticipate continuous low inventory compared to historical norms, just given how the increase in inventory relates to the number of sales that are happening here. So that leads me to believe that Columbus is going to see a very short-term correction. And honestly, I think I've heard a couple other agents put this on social media too, but I feel like we're going to look back on this time and we're going to have a lot of buyers that wish they would have bought something, because they're going to realize they could have just refied 6 months from now, 12 months from now, and they could have actually negotiated. I really think that if rates get back below 6% on a 30-year fix, that we're probably going to be right back close to where we were last spring again this year, because the reality is that people have to move. They have kids, they have deaths, they have divorces, which people are saying are going to continue to increase as a result of people having to hang out with each other during COVID and realizing they don't like each other very much. And so I think that we're going to just continue to see people that have put their buying and selling on hold because of things that are out of their control. When people get uncertain, they tend to do nothing. It's natural human behavior, but that can only last for so long, especially if there's not really a lot of job loss. You know, a lot of people are reacting emotionally instead of logically. And at some point they're going to decide that, hey, we're sick of being cooped up in this tight square footage. We need something bigger, or vice versa. And so that, I guess that's what I said here. And then the last piece, and I don't think this is insignificant. I think some of the new listings, or the lack of new listings, has been because of interest rates. But I think credit cards, I'm keeping a close eye on consumer debt. As a result of inflation, obviously we talk about 9 or 10% inflation, which is what the government tracks. But if you've gone to the grocery store lately, we all know that inflation at the grocery store is a lot more than 10%. And I think a lot of consumers have pulled out their credit cards and they've tried to hold off on refinancing their house because of the rate, and in order to pay off credit cards, which historically has been the way that they've done it. And I think we're going to see some. I just talked to somebody last week who had jumped on my website, who's moving, selling their house to pay off bills. Do I think that's the smartest thing to do? Absolutely not. Would I advise my clients to do that? Absolutely not. And yet I think because people have so much equity in their homes, they're going to begin to do that. And so I think we're going to start to see the market loosen up a little bit in the spring. Again, especially if rates get below 6. So that's my opinion. Source wise, I love mortgagenewsdaily.com. If you are going to do anything on social media, go there. You can grab almost all of those interest rate graphs, the inflation graphs, all that stuff come from there. Realtor.com is where I get all that national data. They make all those pretty graphs. And then lastly, the local data comes from Trend Graphics. If you're at consultants, you have access to that. And if you need the password, just email me. And if you want the slide deck, you can also email me. So anything else from anybody? Does anybody have any questions, comments? Anybody disagree with my assessment? Oh, we've got 21 people on now. So you guys sneaking in late here. Anybody else have anything from another market? Anybody seeing anything different than what I've described? You guys are also talkative.
No, I think you did a good job, Troy. It's kind of what we all have felt and seen. I think this is the time of year that we really can get ahead of our database and just be asking them, you know, what their real estate related plans are when it comes to buying and selling, because I think a lot of people don't know. I mean, there's some major headlines out there and people think, oh, the market's slowing down. Yes, it's slowed down, but it's still, like you said, it's still a seller's market. People don't kind of know that. But if you are shopping, it's definitely a looser market out there. I think we're all the welcome buying experience, and that should be encouraging for people. But I think if you're selling, look, things are still a seller's market. You're still going to get almost what you're asking, maybe above if it's a really good condition and location. So I think for both parties right now, it's an excellent time to still be in the market.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've done a couple contingent on the home sale deals in the last couple months, and they've worked out because most properties are not sitting on the market for a long time, but it gives the seller the opportunity to find the property that they want before they put their house on the market. And I feel like everybody wins versus we just came out of a 2-year period where somebody had to win and somebody had to lose. And so I think it's welcome for sure, like you said.
Yeah, I think Realtor.com, and one of their press releases I was reading, they were saying next year, it might not be a seller's market next year, but it might just be a very neutral market. And I kind of feel that. I mean, this, again, the data right now is still a seller's market, and that's kind of a holdover from earlier this year. But as pricing starts to reflect, you're going to see less appreciation, right? Because I think pricing right now is still inflated because we're using comps from 6 to 8, 12 months ago. But as we start going into next year, pricing will get even more flat just in terms of appreciation. So Yeah, just be more of a neutral market, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's a welcome thing for a lot of us, but you know, I wouldn't put so much there's a lot of pessimism out there, I feel like, and I don't think it's a time to really feel like pessimistic about things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason for that, though, like I mentioned, is the percentage change year over year. And the reality is what we have to realize is that 2021 might have been the greatest year in real estate that any of us ever see in terms of the strength of the real estate market. And so, you know, we had, you know, massive amounts of money pumped into the economy, along with the lowest interest rates that any of us have ever seen. And so to compare this year to last year, I mean, obviously we do it, but it's not really a fair comparison. When you go and actually compare this year to 2000 to pre-pandemic levels, it's not nearly, you know, it's not nearly as far off. And so I think that even just moving into the new year, and once we get past, because really, I mean, things didn't really start to slow down for us until, you know, April, May, June this year. And so I think once we move past that, like first half of this year, and start comparing economic data from the middle of 2022 to the middle of 2023, we're going to start to see a much smaller year over year change, which is going to make it harder to create the negative headlines. Because most of the time, if you actually read into those articles with the negative headlines, they contradict themselves like 7 times. But the problem is the average consumer doesn't. And that's why, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do this every month, just because I feel like as agents, you know, we have a huge, in my opinion, it's a responsibility to let the general public know what's really happening and how to interpret that stuff, because the news media is just trying to sell clicks. And that's what they do with everything, right? But this is like real people's lives, people making, buying and selling decisions based on, you know, crappy data. So.
Hey, Troy.
Yeah.
Tomorrow at 12 noon, we have a lunch and learn here from a lender. And the thing they're going to be teaching is, you know, what's it mean if you, you know, have a third of a point, like you were talking, to get the interest rate down. And I think for a lot of agents, you know, we've been through this season where, you know, we just had good rates, et cetera. So 12 noon tomorrow, they're bringing lunch. And if anybody on the call wants to come, let me know so I can just tell them how many lunches to bring. And it's going to be Keller Mortgage, two people from Keller Mortgage.
Okay, cool. And that's at the Dublin consultant's
In our
office.
Dublin office.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? All right, cool. Well, you guys feel free to email me if you want the slide deck. I'll be happy to have Allison shoot that over to you. And I will see you guys next month. Have a Merry Christmas, and thanks for coming.
Hey,
Thanks,
Troy,
Troy.
do you do the deck in PowerPoint?
Yep,
Do you send it in PowerPoint or PDF?
PowerPoint.
Perfect, because it's easier to cut and paste from there.
Yep.
So,
No, absolutely. Feel free to R&D. Feel free to R&D.
yeah, thanks.
All right. Yep. All right. See you guys.
So yeah.